We've locked ourselves in the School of Film and Television cinema for what might be some kind of cage match of hopefully critical and informed debate about a film that wouldn't normally get that kind of attention.
Well, welcome to the Cinematologist.
Yes, hello.
Hello. I'm sat here with Neil. Where we are, as Neil says, we are going to look at a film that has been a kind of anchoring point for disagreement, let's say, between me and Neil, because I think it's fair to say we're fairly overlapping in our tastes.
Yeah, and I think even if there's films we don't necessarily particularly like, there's an appreciation of what the film is trying to do, or how someone with a different taste or different sensibility would read it and see it, and but this is kind of different.
So the film we're watching is
Pacific Rim, Guillermo del Toro's fantasy.
yeah. What is it? A film?
It's
Neil?
a fantasy behemoth. Well, I didn't want to call it sci-fi because I thought if I call it sci-fi, you'll
we'll get into an
sci-fi.
argument. Yeah.
So we're watching Pacific Rim, and we're going to talk about why.
So why are we watching it?
Well, because I love it, and you hate it.
Yeah.
And more than just kind of having a kind of an easy argument. What's interesting is that it is a film that really polarizes us. And we were both kind of interested in how talking about a film that we both are really polarized on might kind of just lead to interesting debates about objectivity, subjectivity, and whether, how we can see the other's point of view.
I think that the whole love-hate thing, though, is perhaps a sort of binary opposite that we need to move on from, maybe qualify that a little bit, because I think that you recognise that you personally really enjoyed watching this film, although you've intimated to me the flaws that you see in it.
Yeah.
Whereas,
I think that's a good point, because when I sort of say I love it, it's a film that I was surprised that I loved.
Yeah.
So when I saw it because I'd had a pretty bad time and it was on, and I like Del Toro. And I thought, that'll be great. That'll be giant robots fighting giant monsters for a couple of hours, and it was. But it was actually much more engaging than I thought it would be. And I actually, as I've said on here before, it's one of the only films in the last few years I've gone back to watch at the cinema. Okay. And I went back the following week because I just really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed it again. And it surprised me that I enjoyed it so much. And when we talk about it, and you bring up your sort of opinion of it, I'm like, yeah, but. I still think that it's got a lot of merit and it's trying to do a lot of things which I really enjoy and found really interesting, despite the fact that it is a very problematic film. But it's weird because I've not had a great week this week, and one of the things I've been looking forward to is watching Pacific Rim on the big screen and I've seen it, since I've got the Blu-ray, probably about 2 or 3 more times, just in that mood of I'm looking for something. To turn my brain off, but also that I find interesting as a film.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to me, and we'll come on to that discrepancy between you see it as a film to turn your brain off to, but also interesting. Because I think again that's one of the problems for me that I'm totally fine with any film that is an escape, to turn your brain off film, and everybody can have a different kind of film that they do that to, and in a sense that's one of the pleasures of going to the cinema, isn't it? And parking your critical faculties is sometimes a really pleasurable thing, and we all do it. I think just from my perspective, again, sort of qualifying that sentence that I hate it. It's more along the lines of I did go and see this when I was supposed to go see something else, and I can't remember what else I was going to see, but the cinema was full, and then we had to move, and then there was a really disruptive screening, and I was in the mood that I can't remember what it was I wanted to see, but it was very cerebral, something very specific and cerebral that I was really in the mood for. And then it was just like, right, what else is on? All right, Pacific Rim's on, Guillermo del Toro. People have said it's a good blockbuster, I'll go in. And from almost the sort of first reel, I was like, this is doing everything that I criticize in sort of mainstream cinema. I think also that the sense in which it is a good version of a blockbuster in an era where blockbusters are terrible, doesn't give it a free pass. I think, having read a little bit around it, I think it's given a free pass because it's directed by somebody who has made a modern classic. I think we'll discuss afterwards some of the kind of technical problems. That's one of the issues for me, that the technical problems and the plot problems and the acting problems they distract me too much to be able to park that and say, oh, it's giant robots hitting each other. Let's have some fun watching that. I mean, we were talking a little bit about the world building. I think now films in the CGI landscape that don't have great worlds, then they all do. They all have great worlds. Yeah. So I don't think that's kind of like again something that qualifies it as a great film to begin with. Anyway, we can kind of talk about that. But yeah, it was just, and I think generally I think it's kind of symptomatic of a lot of the problems I see with mainstream formulaic filmmaking and aimed at a specific childlike audience. Yeah. And if it's not aimed at children specifically, it infantilizes its audience. Having said that, you've watched it quite a number of times. I've only seen it that one time, so I'm ready to be kind of like, because I respect your opinion, and I'm ready to be kind of be a bit more open-minded about it. And it will be interesting because in the last few weeks we've both seen and loved Mad Max, which I do think is an example of what a contemporary blockbuster could be. Yeah. I tried to watch Avengers Assemble once on TV. I got about 20 minutes in and turned it over and watched Blue Thunder on one of the satellite channels. I haven't watched any of the X-Men. I've watched the Lord of the Rings films and got about 20 minutes into the second one and just thought, please, everybody die. I've not watched any of the Hobbit films, so I'm not somebody who goes to blockbuster films unless there's a kind of specific reason. I mean, we went to see Man of Steel, didn't we? And we just both hated that.
We did. And I've all those films that you mentioned I've seen. And in the last few years seen them because I'm teaching, and because teaching practice more than theory, I think, as well, is that you end up with students trying to or seeking to replicate things that they see. So I think for me, I see it's quite important to see the big films that they're watching, to understand them and talk to them about why. What's good, what's bad, that kind of thing. And very rarely do I see anything that's good. I wouldn't necessarily use Pacific Rim in the classroom.
No. Although I do use Demolition Man in the classroom,
which I love as a movie.
Yeah, it's great. I mean,
it's not very good.
Yeah, it's not very good. That's true.
I think probably nostalgic.
It's great in a terrible way.
Yeah. And when seeing it at that time, I think was was.
But one of the things, one of the things that really got to me about what you said about this was that you put this up there with Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, Jaws, and I just sort of look.
I never said that, and I could no. I mean, that's I. You see that as the blockbuster, and I do too. And if you're comparing the films, I don't think there's any contest. But I think that there are things. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, is separate because it's a perfect masterpiece.
Yeah.
In pretty much every way for its genre. It's Star Wars, I think, is. And I will rewatch them recently, and I think there's a lot of things that Star Wars does almost by accident that have made it a classic.
I agree with that.
So, and I think that some of the problems with Pacific Rim is that it's not as smart in terms of particularly casting, which I know we'll talk about, and Star Wars. But also I think that, what Star Wars has led to is acting in these kind of films, which is very difficult. So I'd like to talk about that as well. So I think that we give Star Wars a pass because of nostalgia and because of its performances.
Well, we have discussed how the Star Wars franchise is a film and a half.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah,
I actually do like the very slow setup to them. The first hour of Star Wars is just kind of like it's a Kurosawa ripoff, really. And then the kind of action gets going, and the second film is an absolutely brilliant chase film, really, and beautifully edited with the sort of story in between.
It is wonderful, and incredibly bleak, not just at its ending, but in its entirety.
And then having watched the sort of the documentaries and commentary on Jaws, because the anniversary is just
40th anniversary.
Yeah, that's right. In recent weeks, or in the recent week. It's really interesting how, again, the brilliance of that film, Spielberg has admitted, is kind of accidental because the shark didn't work. The special effects didn't work, so he had to change it into this kind of Hitchcockian, suspenseful drama, really.
And also, I think that Jaws is created in that period of filmmaking. It's created in the same way that The Godfather was created, that Scorsese was working. So it's made as a film to do a certain thing. It's not made as a blockbuster. No. It became a blockbuster. And then people sort of realised the potential of films like that. It helps that it's in summer. It helps that it's a kind of horror movie. In many ways.
But this is the thing, though. I kind of disagree with what you said about my take on because I will go and see blockbusters any blockbuster, I would go and see it. But I'm just so disillusioned with the kind of franchise and the comic book adaptation. I'm not a comic book fan, and the idea that now, you speak to people who are comic book aficionados, and they are almost come up from a history of being outside the mainstream, whereas now it's fundamentally the mainstream.
Exactly.
And these films that are being made today, and I totally agree with that sense of there's a nostalgia element to those films going back, and a context element that this was at the beginning of the turn to event cinema and all of that, and we can discuss the history of that. Whereas now, every day, every week there's an event film coming out, and where this sits in comparison to films that have come out in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, I don't think it's anything kind of better or worse than a lot of these films that we see. It's just of that ilk.
Yeah, and I can see that, and I wouldn't put it in the same league as blockbusters from 20 years ago. I wouldn't put it in the same league as Toy Story. I wouldn't put it in the same league as Jurassic Park in terms of these, in terms of what I would class, my kind of teenage, late teenage kind of blockbuster loves. But those, having seen so many of those films, and understanding that that's what the studios want, I find Pacific Rim interesting because I think that you've got a fantasy auteur who's used to working in a very specific, who's trying, and not always successfully, but really trying to work on this huge canvas with these huge kind of corporate demands, and trying to tweak things and make things a little bit more interesting. So in the context of the blockbuster, maybe in terms of what cinema is, it's, we could do without it. But I always find myself, like all those films you mentioned, X-Men, Avengers, Lord of the Rings. I like the Lord of the Rings films, but I would never seek to defend those films. I don't know why I seek to defend.
Well, this is the interesting point, because it's that sense of letting go. If somebody says to me, there are certain films that I will just die to defend, but they are not this kind of film. I would say it's like somebody said to me, I don't like Jaws, or I don't like Raiders of the Lost Ark. I would just think they don't know anything about cinema, really. I'm sorry, but but then, like, say for example, if somebody said they didn't like Solaris, or they didn't like Under the Skin, or they didn't like Holy Motors, which again is my favorite of the last sort of 10 years, I would be like, I will defend this to the death, but I understand why you probably don't like that. But like, there are certain, it's like Back to the Future. If you don't appreciate how good Back to the Future is, it's a bulletproof film in this kind of context of genre blockbusters. But I just think that you can see the money is on the screen in order to create more money. It's about getting the widest kind of demographic globally. That influences the locations, it influences the casting. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing if it's done well.
I know what you mean, and I think that's what we'll hopefully try and unravel a bit more.
So, it's time. Let's put it on. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm not trepidatious at all. It's time for Pacific Rim. Well, so you can tell how much you love that. There was some whooping and fist pumping there towards the end and in the middle.
I know. I just find it really exhilarating, and it just gets me. Like, there's something about it that I just find really, really fun, and I just get caught up. It's something about it. It works for me as a film,
right?
Despite so many things, I don't know, and it's just.
I have to say, I still really struggle.
I know, and I
really, really did struggle, and it took me a long. There's parts. I mean, we've discussed this a million times outside, right? First of all, I think it's nonsense from total beginning to end, and what I mean by that is there's no kind of layer of subtext or anything underneath the pure entertainment value of the film. I mean, you've talked about like the world that gets built and all that stuff right at the beginning where it's explaining what's happened. And, there's the bits where, just very, very short bits where, the kids are playing with the kaiju dolls or, you know what I mean? And it's alluding to a sort of the social implications of these monsters turning up. And that's it. It's just 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning, and then it's kind of left. I just don't think there's anything beyond the pure entertainment value of the film to look at, and therefore, if you accept that, then you can just simply judge: is it good fun to watch? Does it work as a blockbuster? But you probably disagree with that.
Well, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I think it's very smart in the way it sets up. What I like about it is that it sets the first kind of the prologue is almost what other films would be in their entirety. That the rise of the kaiju would be the plot. And it's not here. That they're there, and then it's about kind of dealing with this situation. And what I like about it is that although he calls it resistance, which I think is just you don't really need to say it. It is just a group of trying to kind of come to terms with something horrific, and they have been completely left in the lurch by the powers that be. So, and what I like about the world within the world, so that when they get to Hong Kong and they're they're kind of on their own, and they're just trying to hang on. There's no real layers of hierarchy. There's the marshal, and then there's everyone else, and everyone, to quote David Cameron, they are all in it together. It is these people, and the powers. You're
really quoting David Cameron. Okay, go for it.
Obviously, I'm doing it ironically because that's toss, as we know. But there is that sense that it is these people. They are, and that they have been left behind. And then obviously, the Hong Kong sequence in the middle, where this kind of black market.
But that seems to me that comes out of nowhere and is a totally different film. That's the film I wanted to watch. I've got to be honest with you. Was the whole Ron Perlman thing? I mean, he's doing Ron
Perlman.
Well, he is, but the two scientist geeks who turn up. A great comedy kind of sides, and they're in a different film to what everybody has been doing so far. And then to send one of those scientist geeks out into the world to go and see this underground gangster or something who literally gets let into his central layer without any problem whatsoever.
He's got the card. What I mean? He's got the card.
Right, okay, he's got the card.
If you've got the card, it's as simple as that, isn't it? That's how the world works. If you've got the secret handshake, you get in. I buy that completely.
All right.
I
didn't, but okay.
As a code, you would. Okay, so what's the difference between that and turning up in the middle of, the rookie agent who's sent out into the field, who turns up in Moscow and says, the sparrow is hunting.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, it's just kind of a nonsense that you have to accept as part of the film.
What I noticed that time watching it a bit more critically is that, this is an original. This isn't from an existing property. This is something that's been created. It's been created at a vast scale. So it's kind of trying to exist in this world. And what I find kind of interesting but also problematic about it is it's both trying to set up a universe that is going to exist beyond the first film, but also worried that it won't. So it is a little bit disjointed in terms of some of those things should be hinted at in this film and then brought in the second film.
Well, I think it plays to me like a second film, but we haven't had the first one.
Okay.
So it plays to me like that there's a whole, like a universe that is almost assumed to have been created, but there hasn't, so they have to do it really quickly. And they can't do that thing which I think great films do, and whether you're talking about blockbuster or whatever, is they don't there's not an over-exposition. And here there has to be an over-exposition of everything. And that's when the film gets into trouble, because a lot of the dialogue is bad and wooden, and the exposition I just tune out, because it's just...
Whereabouts do you mean, though? Because, I mean, in terms of the exposition, you mean like in terms
just the kind of sense of having to explain in a sort of pseudo-scientific sense why everything is happening. And
but what I like about it is it does it during action, which is why I don't mind it, because I think it has as much exposition as any film. But I think what it does is, which is quite smart and quite similar to things like Star Wars, is that it does it in action sequences. So we learn about Mako's memories when there's a threat that she's going to blow everything up. And we learn about the kaiju stuff in the black market when there's the threat of...
I know, but I don't agree it happens just in the action sequences. I think
it
happens
lot of it is held
throughout, and I think there's a really long sequence at the beginning where it's setting up the world. And I understand why that works for you, but it just doesn't work, because it's right, we're going to have to give you... It's almost like giving a crib sheet so you can actually watch this film.
Yeah, but I think it's doing that, because it has to set it up, but also so that the whole film is not just the building of the world. It's like
but doesn't Mad Max do that without having to do any explanation
but
whatsoever.
Mad Max is different. It's a post-apocalyptic landscape, and this is not. This is a near future thing, and it's trying to be a very, very near future thing. It's not like the world has ended.
Right.
But
I don't think that mitigates the fact that a film, whether you call it a fantasy, it's set now or set in the future or set in space or whatever, can explain it, not even explain itself, but allow the audience member to be able to make that leap without having to have so much of everything explained in a kind of very linear, upfront. This is what everything that's going on here. I think there's a lot. But
Mad Max is people in cars driving through a wasteland.
Well,
this is giant monsters, but also, a human, an imagined human response. So the idea of the Jaeger has to be explained because it's not superpower. It has to be explained. But I think it within the text of the film itself, that can happen without it being an obvious. This is two characters explaining it to each other in the film, but really it's for the audience. Do you know what I mean? And there was a couple of moments where where we were talking, where I was laughing. It was kind of like, that's the moment of, we're not going to tell you, but don't think too much about it right now, which is fine. And a load of kind of films do that. I guess I just don't mind. I guess I'm just, I think they deal with exposition quite well compared to other films, and I don't mind. I don't mind them kind of explaining so much.
Well, I mean, that's a disagreement that can be had. That's fine. That's totally fine. So there's a couple of other things I think that are sort of key to where our disagreements might lie. Actually, I think one of them will be an agreement where the problems are, and a lot of it is in the casting and the way that the dialogue is delivered, or whether that dialogue itself is just bad. And how good the actors are at selling it. So, I mean, all right. Let's start the lead character.
Charlie Hunnam.
I don't know what his name is. He's okay, really. I mean, he's not as bad as some of the other.
He's as good as Mark Hamill is in Star Wars.
Right. Okay.
But he's not surrounded by Carrie Fisher, Alec Guinness, Harrison Ford. So he stands out because when he's having those interactions with other actors, particularly, I mean, the Australians we have to talk about. They're terrible. They're really terrible. Pretty much every line they deliver is bad. But there's that great line. Well, I think it's a great line. Well, not in a kind of, but a good line for the moment, which is where towards the end of the film, they get shut down and they have to kind of go. They have to go manual. And he says the line about "Let's go do something really stupid." And I think actually that line could be delivered really well by an actor who knows how to deliver that line. I think there's so many lines throughout where I think actually, and like where they have that homoerotic kind of father-son, because they don't know how to play that father-son thing.
That's really
it comes
weird.
Across like Top Gun.
It does a bit.
Where you're just like, it's really awkward because they don't know. They can't emote in any sense. They have no ability to do it. But I think that other actors would be able to deal with.
Well, I mean, I do agree with that, because I think that it's back to that Harrison Ford line where you can write this shit down but you can't say it kind of thing, and there's a lot of that going on here. So it does require that sort of presence to be it. But I mean, I think Idris Elba, for example, is an actor with presence. But he is terrible in this film.
He is, but and there's 2 or 3 moments where he's kind of bearable. But I don't. But like we don't know. I don't know why.
I don't know why.
I can't explain why.
It's almost like when you get the Australian and Idris Elba in the machine at the end. It's like neither of them know how to speak English. It's really odd.
Yeah, I mean, and it's weirdly. They look uncomfortable.
And then you've got the world's worst pep talk when you're going to save the universe.
Which we're both convinced has been cut down from a longer. because that's all that was.
I mean, it's so usable. Short, isn't it? I mean, if you look at, say, Independence Day, or even, there's a great sort of pep talk scene in Gladiator as well, and the classic is Any Given Sunday, although that's a completely different kind of film. But that the notion of the pep talk before the big battle is a sort of staple of this kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's very short here, and I think it's very short here because I don't think they've got much else to. But it's weird. I mean, I feel like I watch it and I feel like Del Toro's doing the best he can with clearly. You want to make this movie, which no one has a frame of reference for.
Yeah.
So it's not like a comic book exists of it. It's not like it's a TV series. This is a brand new thing that you're creating with these guys. We're going to be very, very what they think is what the studio and the corporation think is shrewd, about casting it. So it doesn't feel like it's cast by a director, that film. It feels like it's cast by a studio in terms of what people look like, where they come from, what they represent.
You see, the other thing that I felt about the direction is there are moments where you get these little sort of... I mean, there are a few really good scenes. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not like, this is just the worst film I've ever seen. It clearly isn't. And there are really some beautiful moments in it too. But there are other kind of ways in which it's shot that I think that aren't as beautiful, but we'll come on to that. But so there's the memory scene, I think, is very good.
Yeah.
And the little child is one of the best actors in the film.
Indeed, yeah, she's brilliant.
So that works really, really well.
That's what I mean in terms of exposition in action.
Yeah.
Where you're getting information about character.
Yeah.
But it's
that's
delivered
what
in
I'm
really,
saying. No, but
really,
that I agree with.
Yeah,
it happens there, but it's kind of like, anyway, going back to that previous argument, it just is too obvious in a lot of them. Anyway, that's really nice. But then you've got those little moments where, for example, you've got this absolute mayhem, massive action sequences, and then you get the little moment where what do you call it? The thing gets knocked or the bird flies away.
Oh yeah, the cat's cradle and the birds fly away.
Exactly right. On the one hand, you could say that's kind of clever filmmaking. On the other hand, it's kind of gimmickry, and it's kind of, in a way, it looks like Del Toro sort of saying, I'm still in control of what's going on here. Yeah, I haven't lost control completely.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, and I think that is something that is noticeable about kind of auteur-driven blockbusters. Where are the auteurs in that? And that's not, apart from Ron Perlman, and that sequence is very Del Toro, I think. Which he's almost as if he's been allowed to kind of go off for a bit and do his thing, and that is a problem. And it, Avengers: Age of Ultron feels much less like a Joss Whedon film than even the first Avengers. I've seen a lot of Whedon stuff. I can't see him in that film, bar one or two lines which don't land. And it's the same here. It is those things where you are.
And it's the District 9 to Elysium for Blomkamp as well. I think a little bit. Which is the same.
Where is the filmmaker? But then I think that's as someone who's not kind of a massive Del Toro devotee, but an admirer of his work, and I enjoy the Hellboy movies, but they're as disjointed as this. They are. Yeah. He's not a blockbuster filmmaker, so when he gets to make these kind of films, I think he really struggles with knowing what to do in a way that he doesn't when he does Pan's Labyrinth or Devil's Backbone and things like that. So, I think it is a case of him sort of, being allowed to and sort of saying, remember, this is a Del Toro movie.
I mean, and the sort of final thing for me is basically this doesn't move that far away from big grey things hitting each other, and there are some nice sequences of the monsters and the machines, and at certain points they're kind of lit well, and it's slowed down enough for you to see. There's a lot of this where I tune out when I can't see what's going on. And a lot that I can't. It's like the sequence that you were like, the sword bit. Yeah, you should be. I should be. Everyone should be kind of like, yeah, she's just cut him in half with the sword. But I was like, I haven't really understood how we've got to that point in a way. And then, obviously when there's that moment in the center of the film, and that's the best monster action sequence where, it is that thing of, holy shit, there's the giant robot who's using a boat to clobber a monster over the head with, and you're like, that's just kind of like off the scale funny and exciting in that way, but it just does remind me of, and when you get to the end and he says, it's sort of, what category is it towards it? It's a category 5, the biggest we've ever had. It really just reminded me of Spinal Tap. Oh, it's not a 10. Oh no, these go up to 11.
But I think that throughout there is, in terms of the action sequences, there's a lot of subtlety in terms of the way the monsters evolve. Not in the way that the plot wants them to evolve, but just generally, they adapt how they fight based on previous battles.
That works,
and that's not spoken of. It's not, they talk about how they evolve, but they don't. You watch, and I mean, I get when I watch it, I know that these guys are screwed because their technology can't, the funding, the technology can't move on, whereas these monsters are moving on.
Well, you see,
over and over again.
That worked in a way that I didn't pick up on the first screening of it, and that sense of actually they are evolving countermeasures to what the human beings are doing, so the humans are never going to win, does work in that way.
But also this idea of the big grey things hitting each other, and I watch it very critically then, and it's the same response I had the first time. I love this film because there's not one frame of it that I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
And in the way that Man of Steel, I have no idea what's going on in
Right.
the last 45 minutes of that film. And you know, in the way
It's
that
not as bad as that. Don't get me wrong.
No, but I mean,
it's not. It's not for me. It's not far away from Transformers.
But the thing is, that's where I think it is. It is because of that reason where
Right.
and that's why I think it's a beautiful film.
Right.
Because I think the editing and the composition is just slow enough that you do get a sense, but I think it takes work. And I think that when I watched it the first time, I was open to it in a kind of like, I'm not going in critical of this is going to be big grey monsters hitting each other. And I think if I had gone in looking to, then I might. But I was so open to it. Now I can see it, and I don't think it's like massive. It's not Solaris compared, you know. But I think there is. But I think that there is, and I think that's where Del Toro is present as a director. He's trying to make it visually clear, you know, and I love the scale of it. I love the epic scale of it in that sense because I feel the scale in terms of the Jaegers and the cityscape and the monsters, and I can tell the difference between a category 4 and a category 5 in terms of their biology, in terms of their size.
At the same time, I had the same experience the first time where I just couldn't, you know, it's just big things hitting each other. And in a way, again, if we're using the reference point of, and I'm going to do it, of Mad Max, where that was shot in a way where it was just as much mayhem, if not more, and still I could follow. And I don't know whether it's to do with, like, these are monsters, you know, machines versus monsters.
But it's not just
other,
machines. But that's what I love about it.
Right.
It's there is a real physicality to those machines. Those people, although they've got the drift, and I'll tell you why I love the drift as a story device in a sec. But what I love about the physicality is that those people have to work those machines. And I get the real sense. I think there's a tactility to it in terms of these are people who are doing this in this machine.
I think that the one of the best sequences is, ironically, after all the exposition happens and the production design, and there is a weight to the suiting up and all, because that, again, it's a cliched, not particularly in this film, it's a scene you see time and time again. They're suiting up and, you know, in various guises, and that's done very well. And there is a physicality, and it's not weightless like a lot of you know, contemporary blockbusters are because of the CGI. And there is a marrying of that, which is better here than in other films. So the drifting bit.
What I love about the drift is it gives this connection between two central characters that you're always expecting to be resolved in a way that the film never resolves it. Okay. So it brings them together so that you've got two people who can be connected with the machine. It gives the great story the story moment of spoiler alert, his brother. You know, so this character has trauma, and it's a kind of emotional trauma caused by that experience. And then when the female character Mako, who's not very good, or she's not very good in English, I think she's a good actress, but she's not served well by having to deliver her dialogue in English at all. You're expecting this kind of romantic relationship to evolve because that's what happens between these characters, but it never does.
No, it never does.
They have a shared trauma, and then he sees her trauma. She sees, you know, she understands his trauma, and it becomes this bond, which it just feels really nice that it's not a romantic bond, and that there is this. It's a connection based on individual trauma that comes together in this way, which I think serves the film really well, which gives it a weight that. I think gives the idea of having to think of a plot device in order to make this work kind of valid. The
drifting worked better for me this time round than it did the first time. The first time I saw this film, I thought it was just total bullshit, really. And the reason I thought that was because, as I remembered it, they set up the rules of what drifting was and then just broke them. And that's always a no-no for me. With any kind of sci-fi film, there is a sort of... There is an expectation that the audience has to go along with the ride to a certain degree, but then you set up the logic within the film world itself. And films that are bad, they set up that logic and then they break it just because they've got to get on to the next thing. And I felt it does that, you know, where you have this sense of the drift has to be a compatibility, a physical and emotional compatibility, and then towards the end, it's just like, oh, we need the two characters to be together to get the narrative to the end. So therefore, all of that kind of goes out the window.
Yeah, and what I sort of said to you as we were watching it then is I I buy the fact on a basic level of one has no real thought process at all. He is a Neanderthal, and the other is a very controlled.
Yeah.
But I think the actors don't sell it.
No.
I think that's the problem. Is that in order to buy that moment,
sure,
in a general sense. I mean, as we know, I'm very heavily invested in the film. But I can see that on a general sense, in order to have that moment where the logic is maintained, you need actors who can sell it and can bring the audience along with that leap. And they can't do it. And that's a problem. And that's a problem throughout. Is that when the film needs to take leaps to bring the audience along with what it's trying to do, the actors just don't. They don't get there.
I think that is the biggest problem. It's a combination of the acting don't sell the kind of dodgy lines in a strong enough way. I mean, just to finish off on the drifting again, I've made this comparison before with you outside, but if you compare it to something like a device like the Force in Star Wars, which is the comparable thing, I think in the first 3 films, the original Star Wars trilogy, the Force is not really explained hardly at all. It's just kind of left, I think Alec Guinness says, it's an energy field or whatever, So it's left to the audience to kind of project onto that what they think the Force is.
Yeah.
Is it kind of pseudo-spiritual? Is it religious? Is it somehow scientific?
Yeah.
Then in the the prequels of Star Wars, they get into this thing of trying to explain what the Force is in a scientific way, and that's when it completely falls apart because nobody buys any of that. And I think this is the little bit of the problem with the drifting.
I think that is where the film is. Del Toro clearly wants it to feel more like the original Star Wars in terms of the two central comedic partnership, which are very much C-3PO and R2-D2. They're very much in that vein. Yeah. I mean, I love the line at the start, "Hey kid, don't get cocky," which is clearly, but of course it's trying to go back to that, whereas the corporations and the marketing people are thinking that it needs to be more like the prequels, where things are explained. Yeah. So I think there is a real demand on, what modern audiences have to put up with, not what they want, because I think modern audiences would be fine, as Mad Max proves. They would be fine with
absolutely
but there is this kind of nervousness that we need to
explain everything
because they won't buy it, and it's like like you say, it's giant robots versus giant monsters. That's all the level of exposition you need. And I think there's a lot of the film which tries to just be tries to go into different areas, but it doesn't always get there because there is this kind of overarching capitalist pull of we need to make sure we can sell this, and there is a tension in the film which I kind of see.
I mean, the other thing is just sort of really, really basic things like the whole sort of first third of the film, or one of the key turns in the narrative is that they become the resistance. They get shut down, and the reason they get shut down is they're going to build a giant wall.
Yeah.
That is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? That a giant wall is going to stop these monsters. Yeah. I mean, I just remember that from the first time.
But is it any more ridiculous than the kind of policies made by people who are in exactly the same position as people who make the policies in this? And we never see politicians. They're always on a screen. Yeah. And we never know where they are. They are completely.
But you see, that is what I would love to have seen.
Yeah.
More of that kind of and this is where I think the problem of.
But there is a sequel. Start at the beginning. There is a sequel, right. So maybe the sequel.
Well, maybe it should be a prequel.
Maybe, maybe. How do we get to that position? And what I love about it is that, and I think this is quite brilliant, is that they give this idea at the start. They're building this wall, and instantly it's destroyed.
Yeah.
It's shown kind of instantly, physically, why that is a terrible idea. But then they don't, and then they do disappear from the narrative, and I don't find that necessarily a bad thing because. I think that's quite realistic that you would decommission a program, and its replacement would be shown to be completely useless instantly, and that's it, and it's like everyone fends for themselves. That's kind of the situation we are in, But I think that might be me. I think narratively.
No, but I think it doesn't. Again, it's an example. The way you've just explained it. I buy that.
Yeah.
The way the film does it, I don't buy because it hasn't given me enough of the world's context in political terms to be able to say, oh, these are the reasons for the situation that these fighters are in.
It probably is me giving it grace, but I think that I get the grace because of the fragments,
sure.
The small moments when it's trying to do stuff like that. The small things about technology, this kind of reliance on digital, which I think is always interesting in films like this. Del Toro is clearly someone who is making a statement when the electromagnetic field blows out everything, and you have to go back to an old technology in order to save the day. And I think that's very pointed. I think that is, so I think that he's trying again to kind of put in bits which are, but it's how do you, Mad Max is a very kind of, it's clearly auteur driven, but also in auteur, but by a single vision who's brought in from when
and it clearly has been allowed a lot freer reign, it seems to me, than this film.
Definitely.
I mean, I don't know anything about the sort of production background and stuff.
Well, I think I mean, it's just, again, it's Mad Max. It exists. There is a fan base. There is an understanding, which this doesn't have. And also, I think that when you pitch it, I think if you're pitching it, I mean, I think they're both Warner Brothers, actually. What I think is quite interesting is that Warner Brothers have Mad Max and Pacific Rim. I can imagine how this would look on paper, just like Transformers, just like Avengers. I think that's why it struggles in a way that Mad Max doesn't, because Mad Max is clearly in a world of its own in terms of its previous.
Yeah, but it is a better film as well.
It is a better film as well. But I mean, in terms of those kind of corporate struggles that it would have, I think Mad Max is able to free itself from them in a way that this isn't. But also, it is a better film. But I enjoy that as much as I enjoy Mad Max. I don't know why.
Yeah, no. I guess that just at the end of the day, that's the thing that I find quite hard in our conversation, is that I don't really get why you're so defensive about this. Not defensive in the thing in that sort of negative way, but you're defending the film because you see a merit in it, which I clearly
it gives
don't
me
see.
Goosebumps.
Yeah,
I'm watching it on the big screen with the sound up. I actual goosebumps from the score, from when those Jaegers go out.
Yeah,
it pumps me up.
Right. Okay.
In a way that I just get completely. Yeah. And all your points are as I knew they would be, completely valid and right, but I still love it, and I love it not only because I think it's fun, but because I love it. I love its nods to Ghostbusters, particularly. I mean, the Charlie Day character. I mean, I like Charlie Day anyway, but his character is basically Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters. Yeah, and I think it's really superbly played. The whole chase, his whole look, this whole it's just, I think it's great. I made quite a few notes.
Yeah, no, I saw you taking notes there.
Well, just some things like, to try and not forget while I'm here.
Yeah.
Most of it is just the kind of the same old stuff. That was the main one, really. It was the, and we've covered sort of everything else. And I think it's funny in parts. The cat's cradle thing. I think it has an awareness of collateral damage. It has an awareness of the human cost of a blockbuster in ways that Man of Steel doesn't have. The refuge.
Again, I just
that it's aware that there's people in these places in a way that Man of Steel isn't. As much as a film like this can be, and obviously Avengers kind of supposedly deals with that, but I mean this is pre Man of Steel and kind of the same time as Avengers, so I think that there is, it's not as what's the word, careless with its just let's just blow up a city. I think it's there is evacuations, there is bunkers, there is this kind of, there is sense that people are at stake.
Thinking back, I think you're probably right about that.
Which I just, and I think all of your points are, taken on their own, or could be, massive kind of points. But I think that at each point, there's something in those things that it's trying to do. That across the board in all those areas gives it something to me, which kind of gives me something to hold on to.
I guess that's the key point, and I'm just going to sort of say that's the main difference. I think that there is too much here that I can see that is wrong, that takes me out of the enjoyment, and plus the fact big grey things hitting each other I'm not bothered about. But you're able and willing to see the good parts and the illusions that the director is making and the subtleties there, and take on board, acknowledge the problems with the acting, the dialogue, and all that kind of thing, and then see it for what it is in terms of the action and this kind of thing.
And that's what I find weird, is because if Pacific Rim didn't exist, I wouldn't mind. Yeah. It's not like I was waiting for this film to arrive. And it is part of that whole blockbuster culture, which I could quite easily do without. And I'm not defending that culture. No. And and most of the films we've talked about, I wouldn't be able to do the same thing for. And that's what I find odd, is that I want it to come across like I'm not saying oh, it's fine because it's trying to do these things. Therefore, blockbusters are fine if they're trying to do stuff. Because I think this film should do more. I think it could do more.
It could be a lot better. I do think
it could be a lot better. But I still love it.
Yeah.
And I love it despite of the fact that I probably shouldn't, or if it was there are so many films that on the surface look very similar to it that I can't stand.
So there's just to finish off then, there is. I mean, we're not going to do another blockbuster screening, I would have thought, on the Cinematologist for a while.
Certainly not, and certainly not one that we both completely disagree on.
So this was a specific, and it's part of the sci-fi sort of double bill that we had in mind. But there are quite a few blockbusters coming up this summer, and blockbuster cinema is obviously something we talk about to students an awful lot, as you've already said. So there are certain things that I will definitely go see. I mean, I will definitely go see Star Wars. I just, I can't not. It was the first film I ever saw, and you're locked into these things. I haven't seen Jurassic World.
No, I haven't seen Jurassic World.
No,
either. But then and again, I was curious, but the
response has been bad.
The response has been bad, critically, and I'm just like,
I can't be bothered.
Yeah, and it won't be as good as the first one, which is, I think, a bona fide blockbuster masterpiece.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, that first T-Rex sequence in Jurassic Park really, as a piece of cinema, stands up to anything. Yeah,
definitely.
So what else is coming up? Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four has been
which
rebooted.
I probably won't go and see.
No, I mean, the original films, or the original film, the ones that were out 3 or 4 years ago, whatever, they weren't very good at all. And there's no need, for it. They've announced a new Spider-Man. There was literally just one.
Just another reboot. So this is the third reboot.
But this is a Marvel reboot. No interest in that.
What else? Oh, but of course, Batman, Superman.
Batman versus Superman. We will probably watch.
We'll probably watch.
You're a Superman fan, aren't you?
Well, back in the 70s. I mean, again, it's another nostalgia child thing.
I really don't want to see that. I mean, I really don't want to see it because the Man of Steel, I think, is a terrible film.
I'll probably go see it just so I can say how terrible it is. Mitigate the fact.
That's why I go to a lot of stuff, not so that I can slag it off, but so that I can be aware of what I'm criticising.
I just don't. I mean, I don't want to come across though on the podcast that I've decided that this is going to be terrible. No. I want it to be great, but Zack Snyder. I've seen quite a few of his films, and I just think they've all been poor. What else? Ant-Man I've seen advertised, which just looks horrific. To me,
no interest in that whatsoever. I saw the trailer and thought, again, it's so kind of obviously within that Marvel context.
007.
I like the Spectre
trailer. Spectre.
I like the Spectre trailer. There's something about it again, which I liked Skyfall a lot.
Skyfall, I liked about the first 2/3 of it. I thought the ending was a bit of a letdown. The Quantum of Solace, I really just hated.
I mean that's not.
Spectre's coming up, which we'll probably both see.
I mean, I think we will see that.
I can't think of anything. Is there any others we've ever? I'm sure our students will be tearing their hair out.
Saying, what about that one? I don't care. The one thing I do want to see, which is blockbustery, is the new Pixar Inside Out, which looks like apparently a real return to kind of the height of Pixar's, sort of quality. That looks really interesting and looks like a film that will be the first time I've been excited for a Pixar film since Up. I think was the last time I was really wanted to see a Pixar movie. So I should be seeing that because I do want to see that. But
sure.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, there's probably 100 blockbusters. Yeah. I mean, the Star Wars one. I'm more curious now, having seen the trailer on the big screen.
Yeah.
But it does look a lot like Star Trek in terms of visually. I don't know,
I'm just hoping it's going to be a bit darker.
Yeah,
I think if it's there's a potential for it to be a bit kind of rompy.
Yeah,
and I think that Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars film. We all know that, and it's the best one because it's very dark.
And also, I sort of said this to you recently when I rewatched the three of them in very close succession. Return of the Jedi, pretty much the first half of that is as dark as Empire. They win on Tatooine, but it's that whole Jabba sequence is really.
And then it's teddy bears. And then teddy bears ahoy.
As soon as the Ewoks arrive, it becomes a rehash of the end of 1 and the end of 2. So a Toll on the Death Star, Luke versus Vader, and although the outcomes are different, it doesn't feel very different in terms of how it does feel like they've made a third film when they could have made could have ended it with the second one, and we'd all been very, very disappointed as kids, but happy as adults.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's been our sci-fi double bill. Thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure, Neil. Glad it didn't come to blows.
No, I think it's ended. It's ended. I'm glad you've seen it again.
Yeah, I'm glad I have to be honest.
And I mean, I never thought I'd convince you. And I've enjoyed listening to what you say, because I'm like, I'm almost outside of myself, as the scholar and critic going, yep, he's right, and part of me's going, but it doesn't matter, because I still punch the air.
But again, it is that guilty pleasure, being outside of something.
It's not. I'm not guilty.
Well, okay, pleasure.
It's a pleasure, and I was saying, I want to say as well, because over the arguments that we've had about it, I've ended up kind of calling it a guilty pleasure.
No, I know it's not,
because you think, I shouldn't like this. But
you still defend it as a film that's worth watching, worth enjoying.
I think so, definitely.
Cool. All right. We'll see you next time on The Cinematologist.